they wind up getting to a point where they're like, okay, let's go to the Barrows mansion in England, you know. And Gans is like, no, he doesn't want to go. And Helen's like, yes, let's go. And then Professor Barton winds up hearing is like, yes, I'm going to go too. And also Harris and Beth are going too, much to Helen's dismay. But she can't really challenge Professor Barton because he has authority within the department she works, and he has hinted that he will fire her if pretty much she challenges his authority. Professor they mentioned in the story that Professor Barton does not tolerate people challenging his authority. He is kind of like very, what's the word? He's just like, his character is very impassive, very indifferent, and also very headstrong, I guess. So at this point, like 7 people are going to be going on this trip to England to the Barrows mansion. Kay and Edward somehow getting involved with this. Then you got Gotts going, and Gotts originally didn't want to go, but then his boss told him that he has to go. And his boss doesn't like him, so I'm guessing he's just trying to set him up. So it's Kay, Edward, Gotts, Helen, Jennifer. Let's see, Professor Barton, Kay, and Harris. But I'm counting 8 people. Am I counting wrong? Let's see. Okay, it really is 8 people, but Gotts is speaking, and he said you're taking 7 people with him. And Gotts was against this because he's like, why are we taking our 2 like eyewitnesses and putting them possibly in danger, But anywho, his boss did not really care. But yeah, Gotts and Professor Barton wound up having an argument or whatever. All right. So they wind up going on a trip to England or whatever. And then they notice that they're being followed. And the people who are following them are Nolan and Tim. And as you know, in Jennifer's scenario, Nolan and Jennifer do have sort of like a interaction with each other. I'm not quite sure if they have a relationship, but they definitely have interaction with each other. And in Helen's story, they don't really go into that because that's Jennifer's story. So I can't really say anything too much about that. But yeah, they wound up following them, and I guess there was like, basically, ultimately they wound up saying, okay, you guys can come along, and then they wind up getting to a point where they stop, and then they wind up setting up camp for the night before they, make it to the mansion or whatever. So then, like, Helen and Gotts go to sleep, but they don't sleep in the same area as the rest, everyone else. Nolan and Tim offered everyone else their like tent or whatever to sleep in their tent, and everyone else like, cool, fine, But Gotts and Helen did not sleep in the tent. And before I get into the next part, I will say that Helen and Jennifer have a moment with each other that is probably one of their worst moments with each other, but it is very interesting to the story and adds a little bit of development. But yeah, they wind up having a moment where, like, Jennifer winds up telling Helen that she wound up going on like a date with Nolan, and Helen did not approve of that, and then Jennifer wound up I guess getting an attitude, and I think Helen wound up striking Jennifer, and then Jennifer wound up leaving. Let's So yeah, I thought that was a bit strange. I was like, whoa, I didn't know, because usually Helen is really protective of Jennifer. Um, so yeah, after that, the next day comes and Helen winds up waking up, and when she wakes up, she notices that pretty much everyone is gone. I think maybe Gotts is still there, but everyone else is gone. Um, so they wind up heading to the mansion, and when they get into the mansion, that whole earthquake thing happens. If you play the video game, like when Helen walks into the mansion, the earth winds up, they have like this quick earthquake or something. The earth winds up shaking, and then a hole winds up forming. In the video game, Helen does not fall into the hole, but in the story, Helen falls into the hole that formed after the earthquake. And Gotts is up top still, and he can't really get her out. So Helen winds up turning on her flashlight and exploring things a little bit, and she notices that she sees a mouse, but then she sees a severed hand, and it's moving. And I was thinking, okay, maybe this is like that whole little section where, in the video game where like Helen and Jennifer can encounter like that severed hand that will choke them if they don't use the pen to stab it. I was thinking that was going to go into that, but it wound up going into something even more creepier. Helen wound up shining a light, her flashlight, and it wound up showing and revealing like there were like many, many, many severed hands, and they were coming toward her. So then Helen starts running. She runs and winds up running into this room, and then she winds up like putting like some type of like bookcase or something in front of the door to stop them or whatever. And then afterwards, she winds up encountering Harris. And as you know, if you play the game, Harris is a bit, he's creepy, but you see his creepiness more so in Jennifer's scenario in Jennifer's story versus Helen's. But in Helen's story, you get to see. Well, let me just explain it. So Helen encounters Harris, and he's like, "Oh yeah, Scissor Man, he is here or whatever or something like that." And she finds that really strange that Harris refers to Scissor Man as a he, because Scissor Man's identity and gender, sex and gender were never specified. And in, criminal psychology, in their field, you don't identify the murderer by gender until you know his or her gender. And she's like, wait a minute. So she's thinking to herself, like, how does he know Scissor Man's gender, And then she winds up asking him, like, so you know he's a man? And he's like, yeah. Like, how do you know? Like, he's heard his voice. So she's following Harris, and he's like, okay, we found Jennifer or whatever. Jennifer's over here. So they wind up going into that whole, like, wine cellar area. And then in the wine cellar area, they wind up going down the ladder, I think. I think it's a ladder. I don't think it's a staircase. I know in the video game it's a ladder. I don't think it's a ladder. I don't think it's a staircase in the novel. I think it's the same. So they both want to going down into that area. And then she knows, like, Helen notices like a body that's been kind of like bound and gagged and, stuffed with red wine, gorged with red wine. And she notices, she thinks it's Jennifer at first, but it's not. It's Beth. And in the story, she's like, oh, okay. She didn't even care that Beth was, murdered. But then Harris is like, okay, Scissor Man, I've got her, or something like that. And the Scissor Man comes out, and like Jennifer's there too, but Harris lured Helen into a trap for Scissor Man. But then Scissor Man flips the script on Harris and kills him, and then he's going after Jennifer and Helen. So they're both trying to climb up, and Helen's seeming like Jennifer is seemingly kind of like lifeless, kind of, and she's trying to like Helen's trying to like drag her and get her to come with her. And then I think Nolan and Tim wind up showing up and helping too, but then Tim wind up getting murdered in the process. And at this point, I don't know whatever happened to Nolan. I think at this point, I don't know, maybe I just missed some details when I was reading, or either they just didn't go into it. But Nolan at this point disappears from the story. I don't think he was murdered, though. But I don't know. He disappeared from the story for some reason, though. Maybe I just didn't read it right. So they're out of the cellar, and I think at this point, I don't know. I get, where we at? Let's see. So they're out of the cellar, and I think they wind up encountering Gots at one point or another. Then, while they're walking, like, I think these hands wind up coming out of like this area, because when they're walking, they're usually walking on stone, but they notice that once they started walking in this one area, it's wood. And these hands wind up coming out and dragging Jennifer down into this area or whatever. And Helen tries to go after her, but God stops her just in time, because if she had went after her, her head would have been severed by this like stone floor that sealed up the area. So yeah, that's a moment where God saves Helen. Then what else happens? I think like the children wind up showing up, the ghost children wind up showing up and singing like the the creepy Scissor Man song. So that's something too. Let's see, where we at? And then they see that there's children's bones in the area, and they're like, "Whoa, I guess the stories were true." So, Theodore Burroughs really was killing children, and these are their remains. And those bones probably have been there for a very long time. So that just goes on to further develop the story and just show, how, demonic, Theodore really is. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, Helen winds up going into that area where there are like portraits of each of the lords of the manor, and they get to Quentin's portrait, but he doesn't have a portrait though. It's been removed, one of the two, but it's not there anymore. And I know like somewhere in some area they wind up writing Judas, I guess, where his portrait is supposed to be. And I think they did that because, Quentin didn't carry on the demonic legacy. He tried to break it. And Helen wound up, like, padding behind the area where his portrait should be. And it winds up revealing a mummy. Thankfully, this mummy does not come alive like the mummy in the video game does. But Helen sees that there's a note in the mummy's mouth, and that is the door spell. So she found the door spell, and I think that the mummy is Quentin. So I think that's where his family put him, forced him to go or whatever. But he hid that note in his mouth on purpose, to help out. I guess, he really did have some foresight, because without the door spell, pretty much Scissor Man is here to stay, and everyone's going to be a goner, pretty much. So checkpoint for Quentin Barrows, right? Okay, so let's see. We're about. Let's see. Let me see if I can kind of like bring this to an end. But there's like different endings too to the story that are different from the endings in the video game. So I thought that was interesting. All right, so let's see. Um, I think they get to a point now where Gotts and Helen are looking at a portrait, and they notice in the portrait that Scissorman is painted in this portrait. But this creepy little thing happens, you know. They notice when they're looking at the portrait that Scissorman's image is getting closer and closer to them. Like they're looking at a painting, and you see a figure in the painting, but you see the figure slowly moving forward within the painting. And then it moves forward to the point where it pops out of the painting. And it injures Gotts. And then at this point in the story, you're given two choices. And this is in the book. You're given two choices. You can stay and try to save Gotts from dying. Because Scissorman, he wounds him, but then Scissorman leaves. So, you know, Gotts has a potentially fatal wound, you know. So you can stay and help Gotts, or you can go after Scissorman. And I've read both. I want to go in after Scissorman first. So you go after Scissorman, and that will give you the best ending when you do that. But I think Gotts gives her the gun as well before she leaves. Then she goes after Scissorman, yeah. And then they get to the chapel, and then, you know, Helen shoots Scissorman. And I think Scissorman wind up, you may wind up seeing Kay's body there too. Edward's caretaker. And then you shoot Professor Barton, and you notice, like, well, you shoot Scissorman, and then you follow him, and then you come to find out that it was Professor Barton, you know, and it goes into some detail about how pretty much Scissorman's, you know, dark demonic soul pretty much took over him, you know. But also, once you get to Professor Barton, after you shoot him when he's dressed as Scissorman, you're given two choices again. You can listen to Professor Barton, or you can not listen to him. I chose to first not listen to him, and if you do that, then I think Helen tells him to shut up, and then he winds up dying. And then I think Helen and Jennifer wind up going down into that area where the door is, you know, where you perform the door spell. And I think that's where they find the real Scissorman, Edward. And then Edward goes on to reveal that he's like, his name is not actually Edward, it's Dan. And I like that in Helen's story they say that, because when you play the video game, they don't say that in Helen's story. In Jennifer's story, they do. And I thought, okay, you know, checkpoint for the book for revealing that information. So then something or another happens with Jennifer. And I think Jennifer at this point, there's some weird issue thing that happens where, like, her body is taken over either hypnotically or either spiritually by Professor Barton. And she's going on and, like, saying some stuff. I don't know. You know, hey, probably it's best to read the book, you know. So yeah, but ultimately they perform the door spell, and the door opens, and then Helen and Jennifer are hanging on, and Edward's trying to hang on too. And I think before he winds up getting sucked in, he winds up lashing on to, I think, Helen's foot. But then like the ghosts of the children come and undo his hands, and he falls in or gets sucked into the door. Then the door closes or whatever, and then like the whole mansion just starts, falling apart and breaking down and crumbling. Um, so after that, that's pretty much the best ending that you can get. And come to find out, Gotts is alive. So pretty much the survivors in the best ending are Gotts, Jennifer, and Helen. I don't know whatever happened to Nolan. I don't know for sure. I think he probably does survive, but more so in Jennifer's scenario or Jennifer's story. But another ending that can happen is kind of like, okay, so you, instead of leaving Gotts and following Scissorman, you tried to help Gotts, and you're performing CPR or whatever and trying to resuscitate him for like 30 minutes. No good. Gotts is dead. You go into the chapel, and you notice, let's see, something happens to the point where like, I think Jennifer is dead, and Helen winds up confronting Professor Barton, and then Kellen and Edward wind up coming in too. And they wind up offering her a chance to join their demonic pact. And Helen refuses, and shishing, Scissorman kills her. And that's, I think, that the more or less the B ending, I think. And then I think maybe that may have been the D ending. I think that may have been the D ending, actually. Really, in the book, there's no rankings for the endings, but the person who did the translation gave rankings to the endings. Then another outcome is Jennifer. So you shoot Professor Gotts, and not Professor Gotts. You shoot Professor Barton, and then you listen to his story, and then Professor Barton winds up revealing information about Helen that Helen didn't even know that he knew. And I don't know how he found out about this information. I don't know if it was from Scissorman using his like demonic powers to find, scan her mind or whatever. But he winds up finding out that Helen, as a child, was a victim of physical and sexual abuse by the hands of her father. So when Helen was 7 years old, her father wound up suffering some type of a health issue while he was taking a bath. The health issue could have been prevented if Helen had given her father his medicine, but she didn't do that because her father was physically and sexually abusing her. So she wound up, she sees him, and she winds up just leaving and going to a nearby park. And he dies. And her mother never really says, like, I think her mother knows what happens, but she just keeps it to herself. As well, her mother knows that she was sexually and physically abused by her father. She didn't do anything about that either, And while he's telling this story, while Professor Barton's telling the story, Helen's like, shut up, shut up, shut up. Then she finally shoots him in the head. Then come to find out, Jennifer and Helen join Edward, or AKA Dan, in this ending. So they wind up joining up with him. They're talking like months later after all this has happened, and like, they want to do their first kill or whatever, or something like that. And they're like, no, we have to wait for a moment and let things die down first, and then afterwards we can start the third clock tower cases. So they kind of, in one ending, Helen and Jennifer join forces with Edward, aka Dan. Then I think in the last ending, let's see, I think Jennifer Helen does not survive. Um, I think that Jennifer winds up, for some reason, I think she was possessed or something, but she winds up during the whole, um, door opening, like the door trying to suck everything in. She winds up undoing Helen's hands and she falls into the abyss, the darkness, and the door closes. Um, but I think Edward survives. So, hmm. So I wonder how does that end? Let's see. How does that end? Yeah, Jennifer pulled Helen's finger up one by one. It took hardly any time to peel them off of the plate, and Helen, along with Edward, was swallowed up by the door that brimmed with darkness. In the blink of an eye, Jennifer's face, which watched her with a smile, receded to a speck in the distance, and so the door closed. Um, so I think ultimately Helen or Jennifer winds up in the last inning. Jennifer winds up becoming the next scissor person, or the next scissor man, or I guess scissor woman. So I guess it's sort of reminiscent of the previous ending where they all kind of work together, but this time, like Jennifer's like, no, I work alone. Bye. So yeah, those pretty much are all the endings to the story. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much it. And I haven't read Jennifer's story, but I did read something about her story where, like, I guess spoiler alert. I think Dan winds up asking Jennifer telepathically to save him. Somehow somehow this happens, but it comes to find out like a little bit later. Jennifer is pregnant, and she's pregnant with Bobby and Dan. Now that is creepy. So it's like the reincarnation of Bobby and Dan and Jennifer, and she's like, I guess, the Mary Barrows of the whole situation again. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, there's some a bit of afterword from the author, um, but other than that, you know, I think this story is definitely worth a read. It's free. You can go online and find the story, and it's a really good story. Like, I read it in like pretty much one day, because it was just really interesting. It really had my attention. I'm like, okay, what happens next? Okay, like, wow, we're getting a lot of details and a lot of things and questions are being answered as well that I've had. So I really enjoyed reading the story. I thought it was a great story. A lot more character development. Different outcomes, more details, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I want to read Jennifer's, but I can't find it. So if you guys know where Jennifer's story is, or a translated version of it in English, let me know. I really would appreciate that. Well, I guess I'm going on for long enough. This is probably the longest video I've ever done. Um, but yeah, thanks a lot for watching if you got to the end. If you got to the end, um, I'd say if you got to the end, let me know by typing the word scissors if you got to the end. Okay, well, I guess I've said all I have to say. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. Feel free to comment, feel free to subscribe, feel free to give me a thumbs up. Your feedback and support are extremely appreciated. And as well, if you got to the end of this video, write or type the word scissors into the comment area to let me know. All right. Thanks a lot for watching.